Welcome back to this EU4 multiplayer series. The 1700s had been a period of almost constant war for Europe. Sweden had lost and then regained land from the Commonwealth, and its involvement in the war against France, Italy and Westphalia, with the allies of Britain and Spain, allowed Sweden to seize the Westphalian capital of Westphalen from its old ally. During this time, the Sultanate of Rum had undergone a revolution and had declared war on most of Europe. Western Europe was too distracted to fight the revolution, however, and Spain was soon pushed back out of France. After a very costly war in terms of men with rum, the two sides made peace. Sweden had noticed a build-up of Westphalian and British troops along the borders. These two countries, once at war, had now found mutual interest in Sweden. Britain was looking to expand its trading influence around the hub of Lubeck, whereas Westphalia, humiliated by losing its capital, wanted to reclaim its land. Defending the Swedish territories in Germany was around 700,000 men, led by the Swedish king himself, Karl XIV. The invading force was made up of about 850,000 men, with the British Duke of Richmond taking overall command. The near constant warring of the 1700s meant that all participants had very adept officers and commanders, and it is worth noting that the troop numbers would fluctuate as mercenaries were hired and armies completely obliterated throughout the war. Learning from France, Charles XIV of Sweden ordered that shore batteries be built along the Swedish coast to prevent a damaging British blockade. In summer of 1779, the British and Westphalian forces crossed into Hanover. Here they met the Swedish army. The British troops with their higher discipline would feud with the Swedish, who had greater morale, but Karl, thinking his flank secure, ordered the Swedish Second Army to engage into the main battle. This left the flank exposed, and a British army under the Duke of Marlborough started wreaking havoc on the Swedish reinforcement lines. Initially, the commander of the Swedish reinforcements managed to outmaneuver this British army, allowing a constant stream into the battle. A small force of Westphalian infantry managed to catch out a small Swedish reinforcement army. The interception was soon backed up by the larger Duke of Marlborough's army. Luckily, most of the Swedish reinforcements weren't on the move and did not get caught out. They continued streaming into the main battle, which was won, as the British could not prevent the Swedish from reinforcing it. Following the battle, the Swedish army quickly seized the momentum and occupied the fort of Brunswick. The front then stabilised for a period, with neither side engaging, until Karl XIV ordered a raid into southern Westphalia, which managed to wipe out a Westphalian army of 40,000. A second incursion, with the aims of taking the fort of Bayreuth, met with disaster. An entire army was destroyed by the Duke of Richmond before Swedish reinforcements could arrive on the field. The Swedish advance had been blunted. Charles XIV commissioned another battle stack as well as an extra reinforcing army to be created, and whilst these were being raised, Britain and Westphalia went on the offensive. Despite the fact that only one battle stack was ready, the Swedish army engaged the British before they could take Brunswick. The Swedish troops held firm in the woods, repelling the offensives that were made, and soon the Duke of Richmond was driven back into Westphalia. A group of Westphalians were caught retreating from the battle, but managed an orderly withdrawal. Charles XIV followed up on his victory by sieging the new Westphalian capital of Niederhessen, following which a small British army was almost caught out, but Marlborough managed to intercept the Swedish army before it could assail the smaller British one. It soon snowballed into a much larger battle. The narrow spearhead that had been driven into Westphalia had stretched the Swedish supply lines, and the main army of the Duke of Richmond managed to intercept these supply lines, forcing the Swedes to withdraw. A small Swedish army was caught out on the counter-offensive and was wiped out. The Westphalians then marched on their old capital to regain it, where Charles XIV met them in battle. However, Westphalian partisans destroyed a bridge over the river, which meant reinforcements had to go all the way round to the bridge in the north. This not only slowed down the initial essential reinforcements, but they also took them through a path where they'd be vulnerable to the Duke of Marlborough's intercepting attacks.
Just now.
Oh, that's so weird. Why couldn't they? I just got stat one. Therefore, the Swedes withdrew to avoid unnecessary casualties.
That happened to you before, when they build it right behind you?
Noptic, are you losing?
No, match. Technically, I'm winning. One reinforcing army was caught out and obliterated. They managed to send a messenger back to inform the Swedish king that the British had significantly advanced in military technology, far ahead of that of the Swedes. The Swedes were quite a long distance off military progression, as most of their researchers had been redistributed to running the various military policies which enhanced the Swedish army. Charles XIV decided to only fight defensively until the Swedish technology matched that of the British and Westphalians. First, he tried to relieve Brunswick. This time, the Swedish Second Army was ready for Marlborough's interceptions, repelling his interception. However, whilst Marlborough was defeated, the Duke of Richmond won at Brunswick, as the Swedish reinforcements desperately needed were held up behind.
I will send the entirety of
I'm gonna win the other one.
University of Aberdeen Incorporated.
Oh my god, I keep retardedly getting stat wiped because that stat was...
Right.
Yeah?
If you rename Moscow to the sewers, we'll fund some universities.
Oh, my vessel.
The British and Westphalian offensive pushed into Swedish-occupied Germany. The Swedish army was soundly defeated at Magdeburg. Once again, Marlborough managed to cut off some reinforcements. Following the defeat, Charles XIV quickly reorganised his army to strike at the British army in Hanover. The Duke of Richmond had not quite yet cracked the fort in Magdeburg. The Duke of Marlborough's army was taken completely by surprise and suffered heavy casualties initially. British reinforcements were also tied up looting Magdeburg instead of reinforcing their comrades. When the Duke of Richmond did finish looting the city, he attempted to cut off the Swedish reinforcements like they had done so many times. However, this time the Swedish Second Army was waiting. Seeing a mass of opposition, Richmond retreated but was caught out by the Swedish Second Army. Richmond's army was soundly defeated and he was killed in the fighting, meaning that Marlborough would soon be promoted to head of the army. The remnants of Richmond's army were pursued by the Swedish Second Army. The remaining Swedish reinforcements arrived at Hanover just in time to help with a final offensive against Marlborough. The leader of the Westphalen partisans, the angry man from Oldenburg, prevented a full pursuit of the main British and Westphalian army, but some stragglers were picked off. The significance of the Battle of Hanover cannot be understated. If it had been lost, the British and Westphalian armies could have marched on Denmark. As the terrain in North Germany and Denmark was much flatter, they would have been able to conquer it with much more ease, especially with the advantage in tech. Guys, I think I might have just saved the war with those.
Yeah,
what I'll do is I'll do one of your whack.
But that would soon change.
Wow.
Hello, Brad?
Hurrah!
Sorry, I just stacked like 4 stacks after the battle. Oh, I didn't. How he's got 1.9k made. 1.9k man left. How's he? Oh yes, I got the tech. Here comes the offensive. To make matters worse, the offensive had cost Westphalia most of its manpower, and Britain was also running low. Sweden had also lost many men, but had a larger manpower reserve to draw from. Consequently, Britain and Westphalia started hiring more mercenaries. The mercenaries were costly, but they did give Britain and Westphalia a significant advantage on numbers. This would be demonstrated at the Battle of Erfurt. The Swedish spring counter-offensive was in full swing, and the Duke of Marlborough met Charles XIV outside the walls of Frankfurt for a battle. Come on, get the fort, if there's a fort, God.
Well, no, there was not.
As the Swedish Second Army guarded the flanks, the two sides duelled it out. The Earl of Essex, the new commander of the British intercepting staff, was not as skilled as the Duke of Marlborough had been. He failed to intercept any Swedish reinforcements, and the Swedish Second Army made an offensive against him, dealing significant damage and driving him back. The surrounding Westphalian forts would prevent the Swedes from being able to exploit this weakness, however. In the Battle of Erfurt, the Duke of Marlborough was wreaking havoc on the Swedish. He was causing many casualties. After the Swedish Second Army was victorious in Weimar, Charles XIV made the decision to pull back, as he was low on reinforcements. Once again on the defensive, the Swedes met the British at Hanover. Seeing that the Earl of Essex was poised to intercept the Swedish reinforcements, Charles XIV sent the Swedish Second Army to intercept him. The Earl of Essex seemed to have the upper hand, until some of the Swedish reinforcements were diverted from the main battle. The King of Westphalia, with an incredibly strange name that I can't pronounce, attempted to come to the aid of the Earl of Essex. However, the Earl of Essex was already defeated by the time the Westphalians reached the field. This was a complete strategic blunder, as the Westphalians came to the field with only 6,000 cannon, and they were blown to pieces by the Swedish. To make matters worse, 120,000 reinforcements that could have assisted the British in Hanover were now fleeing back into Germany. In Hanover, the Earl of Marlborough was finally defeated, with extremely heavy casualties. A portion of the British reinforcements were also encircled and surrendered. The low numbers in the British reinforcing armies made it clear that they were very low on manpower, or even completely out, and the same could be said for Westphalia. The Swedish recruitment system and greater manpower reserves at the start of the war helped significantly. The slow remobilisation of British and Westphalian forces only emphasised their war weariness. Poor communication between the Westphalians and the British meant that when they went for a counter-attack against the Swedes at Erfurt, they did not have enough artillery with them.
Look at the enemy back row and it's not filled with cannons.
Ha, even I can do that.
Oh no, because he lost some cannon.
Right, Orin,
Yeah.
you should surrender. Fire is...
The British and the Westphalians were blown to pieces until the Earl of Essex brought some extra cannons, but by then it was too late. Sweden now had the advantage of numbers, as the Westphalian treasury ran dry, and the manpower reserves of Britain and Westphalia were redundant. In 1789, the Westphalians and Britons regrouped for one last offensive, which I conveniently didn't record. 820,000 Westphalian and British troops took on 702,000 Swedish, with both sides taking similar casualties. The British and Westphalians marched once more on Erfurt, where Charles XIV bravely led his men into battle. The commander of the Swedish Second Army noticed that the Westphalian stack on its capital was very vulnerable. The Swedish Second Army moved in to intercept, wiping out the mercenary stack that was stationed there, whilst drawing in more and more Westphalian reinforcements. Charles XIV in Erfurt may have had the edge until a miscommunication with the captains of one of the mercenary companies led to the mercenary company's withdrawal from the battle. I think retreated a stack, that was a bad. Without reserves, this very nearly broke the Swedish army until 40,000 men managed to get to the field in the nick of time. The Westphalian commitment to the second battle meant that they had no reinforcements left by the time that they broke, and Charles XIV drove the British off the field. The Duke of Marlborough was badly wounded in the battle and retreated with a large portion of his force towards Fulda. Here, Charles XIV pursued him, and after a brief struggle, he was captured, as well as many British soldiers. Knowing that his enemy had now been deprived of its best leaders, and that he had the numbers advantage, Charles XIV made a proposal to the Earl of Essex, who was now in command. He challenged the Earl of Essex to one last battle to determine the outcome of the war. If Charles lost, he would withdraw and wipe peace, but if he won, the Westphalians and Britons would have to accept any peace deal sent to them. The stage was set for the Battle of Frankfurt.
I'm gonna lock
By the way, they want to end in a second.
Yeah.
Right, well, we're doing another
last
fight.
battle, right?
Last battle, and if I win, can I send a peace deal?
Yeah, deal. That's
Just for the map at the end.
Yeah, I know. We were gonna do a piece.
Channel
Losing
switched.
to 50.
Just before the battle, Charles XIV adopted religious policy into the military. They predicted that this would give the troops a 10% buff in morale. The Earl of Essex confidently marched in, and the two sides began throwing men at each other. Midway through the battle, the British did try some monkey business with some mercenaries, trying to encircle the Swedish army, but they were smashed by the Swedish Second Army. The Brits and the Westphalians were completely outmanned. The Swedish had plentiful reinforcements left, and Charles XIV proclaimed victory soon after the battle had begun. Consequently, Westphalia surrendered and Sweden sent the peace. Sweden seized a huge portion of central Germany, truly making it the mightiest power on the continent. Unless you count Rome, but you don't count, do you? If you had been curious of what the other powers are doing this session, most of them were beating on rum in various different ways. Texas had managed a landing in Egypt and had occupied most of it. However, the heartland of the revolutionary rum was still untouched. 350 years and Europe has transformed profusely. Those powers on its fringes had constantly eaten away at its heart. There would be no Germany, and there would be no peace. But the game doesn't go on for that long, so thank you for watching. I'm going to put up a little recap video of this soon, so stick around to see that. and then I guess I'll be on to the next game.